Good morning again, and thank you for being here for this discussion about the future of the FDA, where there's an enormous push underway right now to modernize and create a more efficient and streamlined agency.
Yes.
And you have your hands full because that is a big job. But it seems like your background is particularly suited to this moment because in addition to being an MD, PhD, your expertise has been in health tech and real-world data. Can you tell us what that means as a medical term?
Sure. So I've always been focused on this fundamental question, how can we learn from the care of all people that have been similar to this patient sitting in front of me, and how can we reinvest the story that's unfolding in front of me and this patient into the story in the future. And fundamentally, real-world data and real-world evidence is information that's already being generated in the real care that we're providing every day. Sometimes it's in the electronic health record, sometimes it's in claims, sometimes it's information that represents the past, and sometimes we're intentionally collecting it from the future. But this is information that is already being generated in the day-to-day practice of care that we can now make sense of, clean up, curate, generate at high enough quality that we can rely on it to understand in a credible way what works and what doesn't for a patient.
And this is something that had not been optimized in the past?
I'm a clinical researcher by background as well as an oncologist, and I can say that we've had observational studies and intentional collection of information through registries and other ways for a very long time. But the world of real-world data and real-world evidence has become possible really because of technology and what's in front of us from a technical and data perspective in 2019 and forward. Practically speaking, we've got better digital technology in the clinic, including electronic health records. We've got the ability to use sophisticated software and also analytic expertise to get data cleaned up and to be of really high quality. And we've also got now many more sophisticated analytic methods that allow us to make sense of it in a way that tells us with much more confidence that indeed this drug or medical device or other medical product is making a difference or not.
And how are you able to apply that expertise at the FDA?
So it's interesting. What I learned as a physician in the clinic and as a person in the health tech industry before coming to the FDA was that in fact, we are sitting in a revolution in medicine that allows us to make use of technology and technology that also allows us to make use of data in really important ways all across biomedicine. And as I look to the role of FDA in biomedicine, as FDA, we're responsible for promoting and protecting public health and making sure that medical products that we're using in care every day are adequately safe and effective. And we can use data and technology to make that process of understanding what's safe and effective much more efficient.
Now, there is a specific plan underway right now. It's called the Technology Modernization Action Plan. So I want to talk some specifics about the plan. The document I read said the plan is to address a, quote, large and persistent gap that separates important scientific advances from new ways to protect public health. And because of this gap, millions of Americans are not feeling the promise of amazing biomedical advances in their day-to-day lives. So how does this plan close that gap?
So practically speaking, when I came to the FDA, what I thought was going to happen was that I was going to bring my expertise as a data person to help to close that gap by allowing us to use data much more efficiently at FDA. And what I learned was that there's a huge appetite at FDA to use data much more efficiently, whether that is to use data more efficiently in the regulatory review process or use data and technology much more efficiently to, for example, help conduct more efficient clinical trials. But practically speaking, there was an early step that was missing. And so the Technology Modernization Action Plan actually is intended to solve for this early step around technology, and I'll tell you more about what it is, so that then we are prepared and capable of using data in the ways that inside the agency and across biomedicine we want to do. So what do I mean by that? Practically speaking, using data means first you have to have a foundation of computer technology and software that allows you to store and make sense of and organize information and data and be able to retrieve it and exchange it in very facile ways. We do this every day on our a smartphone or even how we interface with the internet. But in fact, the way the agency has been organized technically since the 1990s isn't really prepared for that kind of cloud infrastructure forward way of using and exchanging data.
Really? So we're talking about hardware and software.
Some of this is good old-fashioned hardware and software. But you got to make sure you've got the foundations right. So the Technology Modernization Action Plan says 3 critical things. The first is that we are going to focus on making sure our technical infrastructure is adequately secure, cloud forward, and ready for data exchange for now and into the future. The second thing it says is that we're going to enable a series of living examples, use cases, that showcase inside the agency and across biomedicine what's possible today, as well as envision the future and allow all of us to start building towards that future. And I can give you some examples of use cases in a minute if you like. And the third thing it says is that as an agency, we're going to do something that we really haven't done systematically before. And that's learn how to communicate and collaborate with the larger community of data and technology innovators so that we can make sure that they know how to work with us, they know the problems to be solved, and also when they're building regulated products, they have an easy and way to understand what is regulated. And when they're building products that fit into our industry, for example, life sciences or biopharma, they understand what the FDA has got to say in this space so that they can build the kind of products that we need across biopharma in a smart way.
So better communication with the technology industry.
Yeah, so that's something that we haven't really done in a systematic way before.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. So what's the timeline for this plan?
So the timeline for the plan, and as I alluded to, the plan itself is intended to be a foundational book of work that then gets us ready for the future. And so this foundational book of work is really for the next 18 to 24 months. And I anticipate that really as the plan gets underway, you're going to see us also then start talking about how does this book of work also get us ready to start to use data in smarter ways inside the agency and in the future. And I think that will probably start to unfold in the next 12 months or so too.
Exciting. Well, let's talk big picture for a moment and tap into our theme for today, which is innovation and access. How would a more modern and updated FDA balance medical innovation with access? That's saying Americans want better and less expensive healthcare.
So practically speaking, one of the things I think that's interesting about this story of innovation and access is a common denominator across both of these sides of the equation is data and technology. So practically speaking, if we want to speed up innovation, we ultimately and actually have more solutions available to us, right? We ultimately need to make the process of developing them as what works and what doesn't work. we need to make that process more efficient. And so my expectation is that better data and technology is going to help to make that more efficient. How? So some of it is about the process of, for example, clinical development and understanding medical product effectiveness. So that's essentially things like getting the right patients into clinical trials quickly, being able to have smarter and more agile clinical trial solutions such as platform clinical trials, being able to use real-world evidence in confident ways as a part of the clinical evidence development process. Also, speeding up that process is going to be inside the agency. So allowing medical reviewers inside the agency to more efficiently look for safety signals or use data sets to understand how medical products are performing. That's on the innovation side. So I see all of these things as helping us have more innovation in the market. And then on the access side, part of the access story is being able to understand differences in not only in how medical products are working, but how medical products are working across populations, et cetera. Most of which, again, requires us to have better data about medical products, including their outcomes and their cost effectiveness outcomes.
Right. Well, just a reminder to the audience that I'll be coming for your questions in just a moment, so have them ready. Some topics in the news right now, drug shortages and prices. The New York Times had a piece this week about an older, inexpensive drug off patent for decades that's in short supply to treat children with cancer. What is the FDA's role here? I heard that there's a task force looking into this issue.
Yeah, so, I'm an oncologist by background. I think I mentioned that. the drug that's been talked about this week is Vincristine, and this is a drug that is an old drug, as you indicated, that is part of the group of drugs that we use to treat childhood leukemia, and in fact is a part of the treatment group that is a part of the cure for this disease. So it's an important drug. And I think, as you just heard in the last conversation with Senator Walden, that ultimately this drug is now not being made by one company, and then another company is stepping up to the plate to start manufacturing this drug. And as FDA, as these stories unfold, we intentionally work with manufacturers to try and help them get the drug manufactured and the supply ready quickly. But that's not all we're doing is, one-off scenarios. We have an entire staff at the agency focused on this particular topic. And we're constantly working with manufacturers to try and predict where drug shortages might be and how we can ultimately help to relieve those shortages. And one of the numbers that I heard recently that really sort of gave me pause. In 2018, we had a little north of 50 drug shortages in this country.
Oh.
But more importantly, or equally as importantly, I'd say, 50 is still a lot, but equally as importantly, we had north of 160 that the FDA helped to alleviate before they occurred by thinking with the manufacturers about how can we go after and solve for these drug shortages.
Does this tap into the importance of generic competition in the marketplace?
So I think it taps into the importance of generic competition and making sure that we have a successful marketplace where drugs and innovators can come in and actually be able to compete, but it also taps into the criticality of making sure that drugs can be manufactured as efficiently as possible.
Another topic in the news right now, vaping. So so-called vaping illness has sickened 1,000 people across the country. 18 have died. Some critics say the FDA dropped the ball here in not alerting the public to the health consequences of vaping earlier enough. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is a story that is distressing to me as a mother. It's distressing to me as a regulator. It's distressing to me as an oncologist. And I think it's something that distresses all of us. Practically speaking, this is also a story that is playing out in front of us and speaks to the complexity of regulating products like vaping. So certainly as we're trying to understand this better, what we're seeing is that a lot of this is related to parts of the story that we don't specifically regulate, such as THC, but also at the end of the day, how the regulations played out across time. As the agency, we're committed to getting out a policy soon that really takes non-nicotine flavored products out of the market. But importantly, we're also committed and have been working incredibly quickly basically 24 hours a day in many ways to try and understand what is causing the current vaping crisis and how to actually start to solve for that.
Okay. Well, I promised the audience some time. Is there anyone? I have a question right here in the front.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Ace Robinson. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the National Minority AIDS Council, so thank you for being here. So I have a question related to what can we do and what are the federal partners that you need to work with in order to increase to decrease medical mistrust, pharmaceutical distrust, and clinic distrust when it comes to new types of drugs that are coming onto market. Case in point, the injectable HIV treatment that is coming to market hopefully by the end of the year. When we're looking at, it's not going to be just about the access piece that you were speaking to, but trying to prepare the community for new utilization of a new type of indication that will really help drive down HIV transmissions through, of course, making sure we have people who are adherent to medication and able to reach viral suppression. So case in point, like how are we going to partner with you to ensure that we have services that are available that meet the needs of community, whether they're rural, whether they live in healthcare deserts, whether there is the demographic medical mistrust.
So really important topic, which is really how do we engender trust, right? And what are the solutions that we can put into place right now, and then where does this go in the future? As the agency, we've been thinking a lot about this and trying to take action, but I think one of the things that you just pointed out is it's not just within the agency, it's actually all across the community, and how do we have a series of partnerships and handshakes. A couple of practical examples. As we look at clinical trials and clinical trial designs, we need to make sure that those designs intentionally include wide populations, as well as then studies that happen after the approval trials that also continue to teach us how do medical products meet the needs across multiple different populations. So I think it's one example. Another is the agency has invested in, for example, developing labels. In the naloxone story, we actually did the development of labels to communicate effectively with patients in order to help improve the efficiency of getting naloxone out into communities. And so really trying to make sure how do we most confidently communicate in many different ways. And I think these are the kinds of things we need to keep doing together, and we also need to hear what are the solutions that need to be brought to the table.
Okay, I see another question there.
David Rhines, American College of Surgeons Health Policy. We just heard from the representative that if indeed we pass a Medicare bill that would, H.R. 3, that it will really hurt innovation. A lot of our drugs that I deal with, I notice, have been developed outside of the United States partially, and then are tested partially outside the United States. What's the FDA feel about using drugs that are made in Canada, made in Germany? Is there a way that you could oversee the quality of those drugs, which are, when I go to Canada, when I go to Vermont, I go across the border and buy drugs at 1/5 the price I get them here. In Germany, about 1/3. Is the FDA going to be able to, or have any desire to work internationally?
So internationally, and a couple of comments about this. So first of all, as drugs are developed and studied, as Americans, we certainly celebrate American innovation, but as FDA, we don't exclude drugs and biologics that have been developed in labs outside of the United States. So certainly international innovation is as critical to the American public as drugs that are specifically discovered here in our country. As those drugs get studied, we need to make sure that the studies that are conducted provide adequate evidence for safety and efficacy for the American public. And so we look at those studies from that lens. As drugs get approved, we need to make sure that then when they're manufactured, they're meeting American manufacturing standards. And so if they're being manufactured overseas, we have a very large workforce that is employed by FDA that goes out and inspects manufacturing facilities all across the world. As those drugs come into the country, we need to make sure that they come into the country, are consistently labeled, and have continued to meet our manufacturing standards. So we need to, again, monitor for that. And ultimately, if we're going to, for example, import drugs, we need to make sure that anything that's going to happen continues to meet our expectations as Americans, that they're appropriately labeled, that they're safe for us to use, and they meet the need at hand. And FDA is going to continue to focus in that way.
Okay, one more. I think we have time for one more.
Hi, I'm Mike Miller. I'm a physician and health policy advisor for Healthy Women. And thank you for bringing up the vaping. We wrote a blog in August, I think it was, about the vaping situation, sort of as it was exploding. The question I want to ask you, you can evade it if you want because it may be a little unfair, but I think it was yesterday, the day before, in Michigan, there was a court case that determined that the economic consequences of a ban or a restriction on selling vaping products in the state was outweighed by the economic consequence. So basically the judge said, well, the economic consequences of this ban, I'm going to say that's the right thing, whereas the public health emergency is not. From the FDA's perspective, I mean, there are reasons why there are public health emergency laws. I mean, if it's for swine flu or bird flu, if a judge were to say, well, the pork producers or the chicken farmers, their economic interests outweigh this public health emergency, as a physician, as a public health person, I would be very worried. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that, what happened in Michigan, or sort of the general balance between economic interests and public health emergencies?
So as FDA, and you just pointed out, our responsibility is to protect and promote public health, full stop. We also have as a focus to also promote innovation, but public health is our first responsibility. And I think that we couldn't have envisioned the vaping story as it played out completely, although certainly as we saw more and more youth using vaping products, that was a big signal that we had to continue to pay attention in progressively more intentional ways. I think your point about this balance between essentially the market forces versus the public health forces is very important. And as the person who is co-leading the CBD working group at the agency, I continue to think about it in that vein as well, where we really need to think about what is happening to try and basically develop a market for our farmers, for example, versus what do we need to do to try and make sure we protect American consumers, make sure they have adequate information about safety, make sure that we ultimately are having, again, manufacturing standards, labeling standards, that we know what products we should be buying off the shelves. And so as the agency, we're going to continue to focus on that all across the product spectrum.
Just one last thing. What is your most optimistic view of the future of the FDA?
So, as I think about innovation in the future, one of the things that I find absolutely spectacular is the number of potential medical products coming down the pipeline that's going to improve all of our health, as well as the same on the food side too. The number of ways that innovative foods are going to continue to improve our health. That for me has been what drew me to the agency, and I think part of our responsibility right now is to make sure we have an agency prepared to be able to continue at a very efficient pace, reviewing and giving confident information to consumers. And so part of my excitement for the future is both what's coming as well as how to help make the agency be as efficient as possible to solve for it.
Deputy Commissioner, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.